Okay, welcome to a new episode of Keep It Simple podcast. My guest today is very interesting, what I would at least say. For those of you who are part of compliance community or compliance family, this name will sound very familiar. Today with me is Adam Turteltaub, and currently he's a Chief Engagement and Strategy Officer at SCEE and HCCA. But besides this, he has had impressive career both in compliance, which actually started in completely different fields, and he has been doing some work even at Capitol Hill. So today we will go through a conversation with him to see his perspectives on compliance, on his career path, but also what future brings with us. Adam, thank you very much for joining. And let us start with the fact that you had a fascinating career journey from politics to advertising, tech, and now compliance. So, what would you say? What are the core skills that have carried you across all of these fields and pretty much successfully?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the podcast. It's fun being on the other side. I'm used to doing my Compliance Perspectives podcast as the host. So I'm enjoying the opportunity not to be the one writing the questions, but giving the answers. I always joke that I have the perfect background for ethics and compliance 2 years in politics and 13 years in advertising, because if you don't learn ethics there, I don't know where you learn it. But in truth, the career actually makes a lot more sense than you would think. Obviously, from work in Washington, getting a sense of the legislative process, but advertising is remarkably relevant because so much of what you're doing is communication and persuading people, and that's the same of what a lot of people in compliance do most of the time. Compliance programs are about persuading the workforce, persuading management to do what they're supposed to be doing, even if they don't necessarily want to do it. And from advertising, you spend your time focusing on that, getting to know who the people are, what their thoughts are, how you're going to change their mind. And all of those skills have been remarkably transferable to compliance.
Yes, for sure. I always say to people here that sometimes I feel that our job as compliance officers is to be everything at the same time for everybody, because on one hand you have a legislator in Europe, very active legislator, and very clearly defined compliance rules, especially for example in financial sector, and then you have those rules in the law. So it's the law, it should be self-explanatory, right? However, it isn't. And then you have a task as compliance officer actually to do a service also for the government, also for the legislator, and you need to provide extra explanation within your company why is this important and why do we need to do stuff that we would rather not do. So you're actually making a sales pitch every day of your compliance existence in a modern compliance world and within the business and within the companies. So it's a quite layered role. So I do agree with you that that kind of very different career and different jobs that you have done really can only help and increase everything that you do, increase the value of everything that you do now. But now, currently, you are Chief Engagement and Strategy Officer at SCEE, Society for Corporate Compliance and Ethics. What does engagement actually mean in the context of compliance? How do you measure it effectively?
So what we're trying to do, and really what the focus of the role is less about compliance externally within an organization, but the relationship between compliance people and us. Trying to ensure that people are finding the connections they need, the knowledge they need to do their jobs more effectively. So it's everything from the podcasts and the blog where people can both learn and share what they've learned, to the community group that we set up for members. We call them the nets, SCCE and HCCA net, where they can meet and discuss issues with each other, to working to ensure that all of our programs are truly relevant for members, that we're addressing what the compliance professional needs, both in terms of understanding the legal and regulatory requirements, but also in terms of what makes for best practices for compliance officers. And actually, a third category is what they need to develop as professionals in general, whether it is communication skills, like we've talked about, leadership skills, negotiation skills, whatever those may be.
Yes, correctly. You have mentioned here also negotiation skills and leadership skills, which I think sometimes as compliance officer we neglect those a bit. But that's also because of, I would say, there's not a huge market outside, for even compliance consulting or learning those skills, but very tailored for compliance officers. So I think that what you guys are doing actually at SCE is really remarkable work, and it really resonates around the world, because somehow these topics, compliance and ethics, and actually how to improve your own skills, is always very tricky, because rather more often than not we can see also compliance officers in their own world, like, yeah, I know it all, this is fine, I have sufficient skills, I just need to apply them. I don't need to learn anything new. Where actually, in reality, I would say that this is always evolving, and there's always space to learn something new. And what do you think, given the time that you have spent in corporate marketing and now in compliance, what we can actually, as compliance officers, learn from marketers about getting people's attention and changing their behavior in effect?
I think there's a lot. I mean, if you look at, for example, when I worked in advertising, when you started to work on a brand, the first thing you would do is try and understand the product itself, what made it what it was, where was it unique, where was it just like everything else. Then you would try and understand the market and what people were actually buying. And a lot of times, they're not exactly buying the product, but they're buying things like the image it projects of themselves. So I never worked on a beer brand, but supposedly when you blind taste test American Pilsner style beers, most people can't taste the difference between them, but everyone swears that theirs is the best of it. And it's mostly gets back to the image it's projecting. Other products, I worked on was a sinus remedy. And at the time, every sinus remedy brand was the exact same. It was the exact same combination of Sudafed and acetaminophen, but people swore their brand was the best that they were using. And it was always probably because they had a bad headache once and it actually cleared it up, not realizing that, geez, anything I bought was going to be the same. And you had to take the time to understand what was it that made people identify with the brand. Sometimes it could be the statement it makes about you. Other times it was helping them to overcome sort of misperceptions in the marketplace about what things were. And sometimes it was just about things like confidence. That was what really people were buying. And you had brands, for example, that were sold as being very upscale and affluent, and they, frankly, their users weren't. They were people who just thought that made them look that way. And other stuff that was supposedly down home and simple and traditional that wasn't, but people wanted that image for themselves. So there's a good exercise we used to do at one of the agencies I worked at. I can't remember which one at this point, but basically what they would suggest that you do is take the time to write down from a first person point of view what people think now, and then what you would want them to do as a result of the adverts. So let me give you an example of that, which is, say you're doing anti-corruption training or some form of communication. The way you could do the exercise is first write, what do you think people think now about anti-corruption? So maybe you write a statement if it's true of your organization, and do it in the first person of saying, I know the company keeps talking about this anti-corruption stuff, but, the reality is I live in a country where if you don't pay a bribe, you're not going to get anything done. And they're probably just saying this because they have to. So I really don't care what it is. I'm just doing it. Okay, that may be what the assumption is then write what do you think you want them to think as a result of the training or other communication you're doing. So you would write a sort of an after comment of, geez, I guess they really do take this seriously, and I better find a way to get this business without paying a bribe. So once you have that idea in mind, it helps you to focus your communication on what's going to get people to change their thinking, and think about everything you're going to say or everything you're going to show them that is going to achieve that, and helps you therefore target your message better and also avoid the extraneous things. I mean, we've all been in situations where somebody says, oh, we should talk about this, or oh, well, let's bring in that. And when you have that kind of focus from looking at those two statements, you can say, wait a minute, that thing you want me to say may be true, but is it going to get people from A to B? And the answer is no. So then we keep that out and keep the communication focused. Is that helpful?
Yes, yes, of course. I get it, and also I see it from my perspective and my experience that so many times it's also about storytelling. You know, many people
Mm-hmm.
say compliance is mainly rules and regulation, and this is what you need to follow. But I always say as a counter argument, well, everybody who is finish the primary school, we assume that they are able to read. So if it's only about rules and regulation, anybody who can read knows what to do. We don't need um, some in-depth knowledge about that, especially nowadays where you can get everything very easy, very quickly. But it's about storytelling. Why do you think also that for especially for ethics programs and their implementation, why is it important to work on storytelling within the organization?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I think the reason is people learn by stories. I mean, you look at every major religion in the world, when it tells its rules, its approaches to everything, they don't do it as handing you a book of regulations. The seminal books are generally stories of what happened, and the lessons comes from that. And people learn that way. They tend to also identify with them in ways they don't realize how powerful it is. So it's like if you told somebody, I want you to watch an hour and a half movie, an hour and a half presentation about someone making decisions about right and wrong in the workplace, most people would roll their eyes. But you know, when you go to the movies or you read a book or you watch a TV show, it's mostly about people deciding what's the right and the wrong thing to do. It's just what we respond to. And it's one of those things where if you can take things and make a story about them, they get much more interesting. I always give the example of a great storytelling that, you know, certainly won me over dramatically is the TV series Drive to Survive on Netflix about Formula One racing.
Mm-hmm.
Like most Americans, I couldn't care less about motorsports or Formula One especially. But my son actually had heard it was a good thing to watch, and I watched it. And the storytelling there is fantastic. And the genius, I think, of that show is that they don't make the show about cars. It's not about the engines, it's not about the transmission, it's not about the steering, it's about the people.
Mm-hmm.
And the people are very interesting and very colorful, and also very not, you know, compliant a lot of the times. The language would
That's
not stand scrutiny in most offices these days.
that's true.
But you know, when you make things about people and when you give people a story to follow, they identify with it. And you know, in my case, probably to an extreme, I've been to 3 F1 races and watched pretty much every race.
Yeah, yeah, understandable. And definitely storytelling, I think that it's one of the oldest skills since the world began, actually, to trying to explain the world, but especially explain the rules, because we always wanted some form of rules since the beginning of civilization.
Mm-hmm.
So we invented storytelling as a way, as you said, to approach people more directly and tell them the story that's important for them to consume, and rules and behaviors to learn how to actually conduct. But there are also many mistakes that are being done on that path. What do you think? What are the mistakes that we as compliance officers do from your perspective in building up or enhancing the compliance culture in our organizations?
I think this, you know, if a compliance program gets overly legalistic and focuses on the rules and not the whys behind them, so that people don't understand why they're supposed to be doing things, I think that's a big problem. I think also, you know, if you become seen as and actually are the Department of No, you know, a lot of people have said we need to think more like improv artists. That in the world of improvisations, the ethos is yes and. You know, whatever somebody gives you, that's who starts the sketch. Your job is to add to it. And I think compliance people need to be the ones who maybe don't say yes and, but you say no but, which is hey, you can't do it that way. But if we do these simple things, we can get there. I think, you know, compliance, people often see it as the brakes. I think compliance teams should strive to be seen as the traction control. Like, you know, if you have a car these days, your car has the automatic traction control, and that ensures that when you hit the gas, the car doesn't spin wildly out of control. If you've ever seen those videos on YouTube of the person who's got the brand new supercar and they're showing off and they slam on the gas and immediately spin out of control, it's because they probably turned the traction control off. But if you keep that traction control on, the ensures that the car will go straight in the direction you're aiming. And I think that's what our job is to be there. And when the organization hits the gas and says, we want to go in this direction, we're there to keep the wheels from spinning wildly out of control and the car from crashing.
Yeah, that's true. I love the analogy uh, with not stopping the vehicle completely, but more like giving it direction and trying to navigate the situation. Although it's very complex sometimes, because yeah, the perception is they are the showstoppers. Compliance is there to stop when there's a very successful, interesting business adventure or story. But those kind of ideas are also closely connected with the values, I would say, within the organization, and that's something that, from what I've seen, organization needs to decide very early on, like where do we stand, what is our core value. And I always say it's not a problem if a organization decides that its core value is solely to gain revenue and return on profit no matter what. Of course, nobody's going to write that down in their official documents or whatever, but if that's the value that somebody wants to have on the market, they are welcome. It's just that the consequences of that can be really opposite, and then there's a differentiation between something that's a healthy investment, healthy capital, and corrosive investment, which sooner or later, it always happens like that. It always, if you don't have a brakes, if you don't have somebody to actually direct the vehicle, it always ends up in a car crash. I haven't heard so far about, and yet I've been working in finance for 15 years now, and I haven't heard about the company, or even more precisely, a bank that doesn't that has its values which are not aligned with what we would say ethical and compliance values, and that they turned out to be successful. No, they did not. The car crash happened sooner or later. But generally, when we mention the values, how do you see the creation of balance between the values and rules in real-time organizations? Because it's a difficult task. How do we balance those two?
I think the hard part is recognizing that there are going to be times when there's conflicts and there's going to be times when people are going to lose track of them, especially when an organization's under stress. I mean, there's a lot of human research that shows that when people are under stress, they tend to act a lot less rationally and make short-sighted, selfish decisions. You know, I give the example of always when people are working late on an intense project and you need to bring in food late at night, nobody says, let's order in some salads and we'll skip the dressing and just sprinkle lemon on top. No, people, you know, I don't know what the equivalent is in Austria, but in the US, they want pizza or something like that. They go
Yeah.
for the indulgence. And I think that's a risk always in business is people are going to go for the fast, easy answer that just gets the thing done. And the hard part is having a culture where people say, wait a minute, this runs counter to our values, and the willingness to listen to the person who says, you know what, we're going to make our quarter, but we're going to lose it all the next quarter when things fall apart because this is not sustainable or this is criminal. And sooner or later, it's going to come out, and we're going to be in much worse shape financially than if we had just taken the hit now. Companies often think that they can sort of shove problems down the road or that they can go away. And it is true, sometimes they do, but for the most part, they don't. They come back and bite you sooner or later. We've been lucky for business and for as people that the last major recession was 2008, which was a horrible one, but that was 17 years ago at this point. We've got 17 years without a major market correction. And usually when that happens, there's a period leading up to it where the market is slowing down. Companies, though, don't want to admit that their sales are slowing. So people start fudging numbers, and that ends up leading to scandals. And I think we may be seeing that happen soon now that there's signs of a potential slowdown in the economy.
Yeah, we are indeed living in very turbulent times, I would say, on a global scale. Again, as I belong to this generation of, they call us millennials. So for us growing up, and especially in former Yugoslavia, so post-war times, crisis, and then financial recession, and then COVID, and then now the reality that we live in, it's very turbulent. Let's put it that way. But it also, I believe that always these kind of situations and moments in time are actually demanding from us to go back to the core values that we are talking about. And actually, if we talk about compliance and ethics, then we for sure are talking about integrity. We are talking about decisions which benefit the most, not just individuals. So there is no time in history when these principles are actually not applicable and when they cannot help us to go through crises. But another thing besides crisis that is emerging even now as we speak is huge development in technology. So I have to ask this question because it's very close to me and I'm trying to learn as much as I can about artificial intelligence and to do my research and actually to talk about it as much as possible in our compliance communities. But what do you think? How is AI gonna reshape us in next, let's say, 3 to 5 years? How is gonna impact our day-to-day life as compliance officers?
Well, if I knew that, I'd be very, very rich. So I don't know. I see a lot of potential for AI in the world of compliance. I think one of the things is the ability of it to, use it to recognize outliers and patterns. So it can be a very useful tool, I think, in the audit space, for example, in identifying the salesperson whose numbers are way out of whack or their uh, entertainment expenses don't make any sense, which could be indicative of a bribe. I see it creating also opportunities for people to find new ways to communicate better. The ability for somebody who may be a great compliance officer, but not a great writer, to take advantage of ChatGPT and other technologies' ability to write things better for them. I also see it creating a lot of work for us in terms of potential misuses of it. Not necessarily nefarious intent, but people are bad with copyright laws to begin with, let alone once you have an AI's ability to start creating things for you, using copyrighted materials or infringing on copyright. And then people just, as you know, are not yet awake to all the privacy implications, that they don't understand necessarily that if you upload all that data into an AI platform, other people will be have some access to it or be able to learn from it as well. And that's not what you want to do. I mean, there's a lot of guardrails that need to be put around AI. and that's going to keep compliance teams very, very busy. But at the same time, I think, used properly, like any other technology out there, it's going to have uses. And I think it's hard for us to know where it's going to go. I mean, I was there at the birth of the internet as a commercial tool, and I vividly remember the days where everyone said, no, you can't sell anything online. People will, and they just burn down your house if you did it. you know, Obviously that changed very dramatically. And then there were people who sort of had naive assumptions about what they could do. I still remember somebody was looking to fundraise and get sponsors for something and thought, I'll build a website. Well, it's like, okay, but you got to still get people to that website. Just having a website doesn't do anything. Um, it's going to take a while before we really know what's real and what isn't. Right now, the hype machine is full power. I mean, I keep expecting, somebody to start trying to sell a coffee that has AI in it. Like that's a thing. But people, claim that right, left, and center is AI is everywhere. But is it or isn't it? We don't know. It's going to take a while for us to get a sense. But in that interim, certainly we're going to be busy trying to figure out what this all means and making sure that the business unit is using it properly and understanding the implications of what they're doing.
True. It's like a buzzword nowadays. AI is definitely like a buzzword, and as you said, I'm expecting to have a coffee with AI because it seems to sell stuff, and it seems to be a part of everyday advertising and communication and everything that we see. And it's definitely, yeah, gonna be challenging for us as compliance officer, but luckily I see a lot of work for us, which is a good news. And for everybody wanting to join this profession, it's also a good news. But for those people who are, let's say, on the beginning of their career, and having in mind your experience very diverse, as we mentioned, what would you say would be an advice to them to become more influential communicators? Because I think this is also one of the skills that we do not sharpen that much. So how do we become better compliance communicators?
Well, I think, if your organization has training budget, look to find those skills. The other thing I would say is something I still remember from, gosh, I'm afraid to admit how many years ago it was. A course I took that helped you focus on always communicating from the listener's perspective. Always think about not what you have to say, but what is it that people want to hear or don't want to hear, and how do you make what you're about to say something that they will want to hear, despite maybe a preference not to hear those things. It's always good to get out of your own head and to try and understand who it is that you're talking to. And it goes back to that exercise I talked about earlier about writing what people think now versus what you want them to think. Take the time not to say, like, look, we have to tell people this, but also to say, what are they thinking now? Okay, how do we overcome that? How do we help them understand? And how do we help them see it's in their interest to do this? Going back to that example you gave of a company that they said their core value is to make as much revenues as possible, is saying to them, look, if you want to hold on to those revenues, then you got to do this. Otherwise, you're going to pay back the government everything you made and 5 times more, and help them understand what the risks are there.
True, and thank you for this advice. I'm sure that a lot of our colleagues who listen to this will appreciate it very much. And finally, when you look back at your career and all the stuff that we have mentioned so far, and from Capitol Hill to compliance strategist, and all the jobs that you are doing now actually, and work and contribution you give to compliance community, what would you do differently? What would you do the same?
Well, I would have kept my Apple stock, that's for sure. um,
Yeah,
uh,
regrets, yeah.
Selling that was a mistake a long time ago. Um, what would I do? That's a good question. What would I do differently? What I would do the same. Um, Honestly, there's a lot of regrets I have in life. In terms of things I've done, I think I stayed in advertising too long before I got out. But I think it's the one thing I would say to everyone is don't lose track of what you learned in every job. You know, even though you may say you hate a job, and you may very well hate it, and they may treat you badly, and as soon as you're done, you want to not think about it ever again. Is think about what you learned from that experience. You know, I think of a time where was at an ad agency that was closing. It had lost its largest account, and I wanted to find a job. And I got offered one at an ad agency that I knew I was a terrible fit for. That my personality did not match it, but I took it anyway because I wanted to have a job right away. And it wasn't purely for financial reasons, there were some other reasons too. And it turned out to be 9 miserable months there before they had a layoff and I was included in it. And it taught me the lesson never take a job just to take a job. You know, unless you
Mm.
absolutely have to, don't take a job just to take another job or for a few dollars more than, especially if it's you're doing it just for a few dollars more than what you were making. Always pick a job that's a fit for you in a place where you think you can succeed. And so always take the lessons from the bad things and don't put them behind you, but put maybe the emotional baggage of it behind you, but keep the learning with you and take it with you to the next place.
That's a good one, very good one. And yeah, I would add also that it is very crucial to like the stuff that you are doing, the job that you are doing. If you don't like it, I don't think it's ever gonna work out, whether we try
No.
to pretend or not. And I personally don't think that people who are doing stuff, their work, professional career, even earning tons of bricks of money, if they don't like it, essentially they are not happy. But maybe that's a topic for some other more in-depth psychological podcast. We try to keep it on compliance and ethics topics. Adam, thank you very much. This has
Oh,
been
my pleasure.
very fulfilling, very interesting. I do hope that it reaches a lot of people and especially young compliance professionals because they really have a lot to learn from you and from your very rich experience. And thank you very much once again.
Thank you.